Every year, people all over the world look forward to traveling abroad. They get to see new places, meet interesting people, and experience a different walk of life. While traveling gives people a lot of things to look forward to, it can sometimes come with more than anyone bargained for. Some tourists have set foot in the wrong place at the wrong time, sending them on a journey they never expected. Crime gangs operate in many places around the globe. Each gang has a mission, whether it's to make money or a political statement. With a foolproof plan to kidnap tourists, these gangs can get the attention of the people who can give them what they want. Some gangs will kidnap tourists for ransom money. They will keep their victims in a state of captivity, giving them the bare minimum to stay alive until they get the money. Other gangs will put a tourist's life at risk to get the government's attention. In today's video, we're going to cover 8 terrifying true cases where tourists were kidnapped by organized crime gangs. From cartels making DEA agents on their turf disappear, to people being stolen by gunmen from their hotel, each story we talk about today will raise the hair on your arms and have you rethinking your travel plans. Stay tuned for some of the most startling gang kidnappings. The Camarena Abduction, Mexico, 1985. Our first story isn't exactly a tourist, but it does show the dangers one can face when they're in a different territory. Enrique Camarena, who went by the nickname Kiki, was a DEA agent. He was very serious about his work, putting a high level of motivation into every case he worked on. He was good at what he did, but maybe a little too good. As he was coming to the breaking point in one of the cases he was working on, everything took a drastic turn. Then, Kiki Camarena was never seen again. In the mid-1980s, most international drug trafficking went through Guadalajara. Members of cartels from all over Mexico would come to this area for operations. Around 1984, Operation Godfather launched. Several DEA agents went undercover to pose as buyers and interact with members of the cartel. The agents were supposed to get on the cartel's inside and find out who the key players were and what they were doing. Kiki had the same assignment as the other agents, but he took his a bit more seriously. He was more motivated to get to the root of the case. Kiki was on this operation for nearly a year before he disappeared. It was only a month before his role on the case was complete, and he was planning to transfer to San Diego, but he got into a car on February 7, 1985, and was never seen alive again. When Kiki's wife reported him missing, authorities had more than enough reason to believe that members of the cartel were behind the deed. The DEA had already been receiving a lot of threats, and there was a lot of pressure building up on them. To add more fuel to the fire, a Mexican pilot, Zavala Avalar, who worked with the DEA, had also gone missing that same day. This launched a manhunt, with investigators searching cross-border. However, roughly 1 month after the men went missing, their bodies were discovered in the Mexican state of Michoacan. The case turned from a missing person to a homicide investigation. By April of 1985, 3 men from the cartel were charged and arrested for kidnapping and murder: Ernesto Fonseca, Rafael Caro Quintero, and Miguel Felix Gallardo. Now, it may seem like this case was solved within a few months, but something came out decades later that shook what everyone thought they knew about the disappearance. This news even had people questioning if Kiki Camarena was betrayed by one of his very own. There were inquiries that members of the Reagan administration had supplied weapons to drug traffickers who were fighting the socialist government in Nicaragua. Could the illegally armed traffickers use this power to take out one of their enemies? Did they take care of Kiki because he knew too much? While all of this was very alarming, the US government has denied any claims of providing illegal weapons. Lindhout's Ordeal, Somalia, 2008. The next story is one of sheer terror. Amanda Lindhout was a young and vibrant journalist from Alberta. She was only 28 years old in 2008 and ventured to Somalia with an Australian photographer, Nigel Brennan, for her next big story. But what she never expected was to become the story herself. Amanda and the photographer were kidnapped by Islamic terrorists. The main culprit was a man named Ali Omar Adder, who went by the name Adam. While the 2 victims were kidnapped, they both had different experiences. Adam locked Nigel in a room with windows, furniture, and books. He kept Amanda shackled in a small space that was dark, moldy, and rat-infested. She was starved, abused, and tortured, but Adam kept her alive. After all, he had bigger plans for the journalist and her friend. Adam did have plans to release his victims, but only for a price. The kidnappers originally asked for $3 million. Canadian and Australian government officials worked together and made the kidnappers an offer of $250,000. This offer was rejected, leaving both victims' families in fear of what would happen next. The kidnappers then made a second ransom demand, wanting $1.5 million. Both families worked together and brought forward $1.2 million, which was enough to get them to agree to release the victims. On November 25, 2009, after 460 days in captivity, Amanda and Nigel were set free. While they were able to go back home, where they were safe and surrounded by loved ones, it wasn't over yet. Amanda was trying her best to move on after the events. She was seeking therapy and taking her time building her life back. But one afternoon, she logged onto her Facebook account and saw that there was a message. The message said hello. It wasn't the message that gave her goosebumps, but who it was coming from: Adam. She realized it was far too easy for him to find her and called the RCMP right away. They launched an investigation where an officer started networking with Adam, pretending to be Amanda's media consultant. Adam fell for this, almost as though his main goal was to put the spotlight on himself. He had a very big ego and believed that the publicity could get him a book deal. Unfortunately for Adam, he wasn't as smart or cunning as the other gang members we've covered in the past. His greed and desire for fame had him walking right into police custody. The officer, posing as a media consultant, offered to meet Adam in person to discuss the book. He was able to get the fame-hungry kidnapper to cross the border and come to Canada for this supposed book deal. The investigator was able to get Adam to talk about his role in the kidnapping on camera, which was enough to bring this sick man to justice. Salopek's tragic end, Egypt, 2015. Our next story is the tragedy of Tomislav Salopek. This young father was kidnapped and used as a pawn by the ISIS militant group. Tomislav was a 31-year-old Croatian who was married with a child. He would have done anything for his family. His main goal was to work hard and build his family the life he wanted to have. That's exactly why he traveled to Egypt and was there on the day he got kidnapped. He worked as a surveyor, exploring the production of gas and oil. He got into a vehicle on July 15th with the intention of traveling to work, but this vehicle was stopped by a gang of men. They forced him out of the car and drove away with him. At this point, nobody knew what had happened to him, but a few weeks after his disappearance, he was seen again, only it wasn't in person. He was witnessed in a video that was made specifically for Egypt's government. In the video, Tomislav identified himself and said that the terrorists would kill him in 48 hours if unspecified Muslim women weren't immediately released from prison. Efforts were put forth to find and rescue Tomislav, but it wasn't enough. A picture ended up circulating online of his beheaded body. Along with the gruesome photo, the ISIS militant group also left a statement claiming that Mr. Salopek was killed for Croatia's participation in the war against the Islamic State. At the time of the photo's release, the Egyptian government scrambled to confirm the authenticity of the photograph. They still had a shred of hope that it was a fake image, but they were far too late. Unfortunately, Tomislav's body was never found, and nobody has been brought to justice for this horrific crime. Dugard's living nightmare, California, 1991. Our next story isn't one of a tourist, but this kidnapping shocked the entire world. J.C. Dugard was an 11-year-old girl on her way to school in South Lake Tahoe in 1991. She was waiting at the bus stop where her stepfather, Carl Probin, dropped her off. A car pulled up and two unknown assailants grabbed the young girl and forced her into the vehicle. Her stepfather attempted to chase the car down on his bike but couldn't keep up. Although there were witnesses, they got away too fast for anyone to give a lead. So, who took J.C. Dugard? Her kidnappers were a married couple, Philip and Nancy Garrido. They owned a property in Antioch, California, where they held her captive. But nobody had any clue that they were the ones who had the young girl, despite the fact that Philip was a registered sex offender. While held in captivity, J.C. was repeatedly abused by Philip. He ended up impregnating her twice, and she gave birth to 2 daughters. Loved ones thought that they would never see J.C. again, but in 2009, there was a glimmer of hope. Philip brought his 2 daughters along with him to the University of California, Berkeley. He wanted to inquire about hosting a religious event on campus. In order to do this, a background check was required. This is when everything hit the fan for the Garridos. The university discovered his violent background as a registered sex offender. To make matters worse, his parole officer wasn't aware of his daughters. As they looked further into his family and background, they started uncovering all the lies in his web. This shook Philip, who ended up confessing the truth. After 18 years, J.C. Dugard and her daughters were rescued and returned to her mother. Philip and Nancy got their day in court and both pleaded guilty in 2011. Nancy was sentenced to 36 years to life in prison, while Philip received 431 years behind bars. Rodwell's ordeal in the Philippines. Philippines, 2011. Abu Sayyaf is a Muslim militant group that operates in the southern Philippines. They are the smallest group in this region, but they are the most radical. This group is known for extreme violence and kidnapping. The group has a long record of kidnapping foreigners in the area, and they still remain a threat to this day. Back in 2011, this group abducted Warren Rodwell. Warren was an Australian who was living in the area with his wife, running a shop by the sea. On a Monday evening in December, he was startled by a noise outside of his house. Two men dressed as police officers ambushed him, shot him in the hand, and then handcuffed him. They dragged him through a field, put him in a boat, and then took him into the jungle, where he was held captive for 472 days. The group had hired young men from the area who grew up in poverty and were desperate for money to act as guards. This made it nearly impossible for Warren and other victims to escape. But at the same time, it meant that these guards were only doing it for the money. They didn't have the same Islamic beliefs as higher-ups in the group. Many of the guards treated the victims with the limited amount of care that they could provide without getting themselves into trouble. But one guard came along who had ulterior motives. His aunt was previously kidnapped by the group, and he wanted to get even. This guard ended up telling Warren who was in power and giving him 11 names to be specific. Warren made sure to memorize every name he was told. Warren feared for his life. He was doing everything he could to keep himself sane as he counted the days. It didn't help that he had no idea if he would ever be freed. However, little did he know, the Australian government and his family were working on ransom negotiations. In March 2013, a ransom deal was made, and Warren Rodwell was released for $100,000. Betancourt's terrifying kidnapping, South Colombia, 2002. Ingrid Betancourt is a Colombian politician who's also known as an international symbol for peace talks. In 2002, she was traveling throughout areas of Colombia on her political campaign. However, everything changed for her at one roadblock. Her vehicle was stopped, and she was taken by FARC rebels, a Colombian guerrilla group that campaigned resistance against the government. The rebels held her captive in the jungle. Speaking to an interviewer after her rescue, Ingrid admitted that being mentally alone in the rainforest was more terrifying than the violence from her captors. While she was held captive, she was starved, beaten, and threatened frequently. She even suffered from hepatitis without medical care. While she was beginning to give up hope, the Colombian army was developing their plan for her rescue mission. They enlisted spies to pose as rebels and get into the guerrilla group. This was a necessary step to get in undercover and get Ingrid and the other hostages out of there. After 6 years in captivity, the politician was finally set free. As Ingrid returned home, she found that adjusting to life presented its fair share of challenges. She took everything one step at a time, being patient with each obstacle. But 13 years later, she was reminded of the horrific events all over again. In 2016, she attended a peace accord where former FARC rebels apologized and took responsibility for the events. These rebels admitted to orchestrating over 21,000 kidnappings. Romano's captivity in Kenya, 2018. Silvia Romano was an Italian woman who converted to Islam. She traveled to Kenya in 2018 to serve as an aid worker with the charity Africa Milele Onlos. The 23-year-old volunteer was staying at a hotel in Kilifi County. One November day, she was kidnapped from the hotel and 5 other people were wounded in the attack. This was the first time in nearly 7 years that a tourist had been kidnapped in the country. Police jumped on the case immediately. They offered a $10,000 reward for any information that could lead them to her whereabouts. Many countries joined together to solve this case and secure her release. Kenya was able to seek help from authorities in Italy, Somalia, and Turkey. Thanks to an ongoing effort from these agencies, Silvia was found in Somalia outside the capital of Mogadishu. She spent 18 months in captivity. As she returned to Milan, people throughout her community were celebrating her arrival. However, what makes this case terrifying is that the group that kidnapped her was never brought to justice. In fact, there is no hard-cold proof of who or which group kidnapped Silvia Romano. Authorities have strong reason to believe that she was abducted by the Islamic terrorist militant group Al-Shabaab. While many Italians were relieved to have Silvia Romano safe and back at home, her arrival was also met with criticism. This time it was political criticism. Many people campaigning for the far right argued that she only went to Kenya for attention and that there were plenty of organizations within Italy where she could have volunteered. Others from the far left thought that it was an outrageous claim to make and that people should have been supportive of her charitable efforts. Despite the controversy, Silvia and her family have expressed undying gratitude for everyone who played a part in bringing her home. Kidnapped by Pirates, Seychelles, 2009. In October 2009, British couple Paul and Rachel Chandler were enjoying their dream vacation, sailing throughout the southeastern coast of Africa. They were traveling from Seychelles to Tanzania when things took a horrifying turn. The couple's private yacht was bombarded by Somali pirates, and the couple was taken hostage. The pirates issued a $7 million ransom for the couple's freedom a week after they were taken. Representatives from the Somali made videos in an attempt to bargain with the pirates for Chandler's freedom. But on November 20, 2009, a horrifying video was released where the couple stated that they feared they would be killed within a week if the ransom wasn't paid. In January 2010, Paul was allowed to do a phone interview where he pleaded and again mentioned that it was only a matter of days before he and his wife were to be killed. However, the Foreign Office was not giving in. They had concerns that if they paid the ransom, pirates would continue taking hostages for more money. This ended up being a very long and drawn-out hostage situation. While in captivity, Paul and Rachel were separated. Neither one had any idea if their partner was safe or not. Eventually, representatives were able to strike a deal with the pirates. On November 14, 2010, the pirates released the Chandlers near the Ethiopian border. Rachel and Paul didn't let this ordeal destroy their passion for sailing. After returning to their home and rebuilding their lives, they also started making travel plans again. We're happy to say that several of the victims that we discussed today were returned safely to their families. Our condolences go out to those who did not make it home. These stories go to show how powerful the smallest gang can be when preying on unsuspecting people. When a tourist gets kidnapped in a foreign country, government officials from their home country put efforts forward to bring them home, even if it means cooperating with the crime gangs to pay them. The Kiki Camarena case is one that has a lot of people debating. Do you think it's possible that people on his own side set him up by supplying weapons? Or could the cartel have caught on to who he really was and how much he knew? This wraps up our story on 8 times tourists got kidnapped by crime gangs. We hope you enjoyed today's video and want to thank you for staying tuned to the very end. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and don't forget to hit like and share for more Mafia Mystique content.